Hi, my name is Brian Droidcore. I'm an editor at Art in America magazine, where I run a weekly email newsletter called The Program about art and technology. And this is a series of video interviews with people who are doing interesting things in that field. And today I'm talking to Alexander Porter, an artist and a co-founder of Scatter, which is a Brooklyn-based company that works with immersive media and also produces tools for other artists working um, in VR to use. Hi, Alexander. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Yeah, so maybe first you could just tell us a little bit about what Scatter is, what kind of projects you work on.
Scatter is an interdisciplinary immersive media studio, and we're located in Brooklyn, as you mentioned. Um, and our work is focused on the kind of the defining and democratizing a discipline that we call volumetric filmmaking. Um, and so for us, volumetric filmmaking it's a new way of creating that's sort of an intersection between um, video games on one hand and cinema on the other. Um, and what it allows you to do is to create immersive stories that give the viewer the freedom to sort of move physically through the story, often in virtual reality, but not exclusively in virtual reality. And the opportunity is then you can record real people using tools that we've created, um, and to sort of capture or scan real spaces and use those then to create stories, kind of immersive or virtual stories that are not synthetic in the way that you might conventionally think of as a video game. And so it is this wonderful intersection between cinema and video games. Um, and the result then is that you can tell stories that are difficult to tell in other ways, stories that, for example, take place in virtual spaces, or stories that are kind of at the level of weirdness and complexity of our current moment, where oftentimes they might involve networks or complex ideas, or you're able to suddenly kind of illustrate things that you can't with conventional cinema.
So
Um, yeah.
you use the term volumetric filmmaking. How is that different from other technologies of 360-degree image capture?
Yeah, it's such an essential question. And this material is really new. Like I literally find myself re-explaining what I do to my family every time I see them, basically, you know? So it's a way to think about it is you have 360-degree video, which is like, it's a subset of virtual reality filmmaking, basically. Um, and what that allows you to do is to kind of look around inside of a sphere. Um, and then on the other hand, you have conventional video games, which are extraordinary and really advanced, and in a way are kind of taking over the entertainment landscape right now. But those are typically entirely synthetic virtual spaces where you might see an avatar where it's a kind of cartoonish or kind of a facsimile representation of a person. Volumetric filmmaking sort of sits right at the intersection there, where we are recording with 3D sensors, like 3D scanners, um, oftentimes attached or coupled to conventional video cameras. So when you're capturing an image, like here we have a kind of rectangular image, but ultimately it's flat. All of the depth we sort of add with our eyes. With volumetric filmmaking, what's happening is you are adding a layer of depth. You're recording both in depth and color. And this is it's kind of an emergence in photography and filmmaking that's basically brought to us by something called computational photography, which is very much hidden. It's like a hidden layer on all of our devices now. So for example, the conventional iPhones have depth sensors and cameras embedded into them. So this is becoming kind of a norm. And for us, we're intending to design the tools, the sort of required tools for that new uh, medium, basically.
Do you want to talk about some projects you're using this to make now?
Uh, yes, I can do that. So I'll describe some projects that we have sort of worked on previously. So
Okay.
first, and these projects illustrate this idea of telling stories that can't be told in other ways. And for us, this is it's an essential, almost like a requirement or kind of a guiding principle when we consider whether a project is suitable for volumetric filmmaking. We ask ourselves, would it be a better book? Would it be a better documentary film, et cetera, and ask ourselves truly, given that it is a nascent way of creating, it's quite challenging. So you really need to make sure that when you're telling a story, it should be created in this way. And so these are some of our recent projects, where that first one on the left is a project called Clouds, which was created by my co-founder, James George, and a partner and friend, Jonathan Menard. And this was premiered initially at Sundance in 2014. So this was very much at the very beginning of virtual reality creation. And it's a documentary, virtual reality documentary experience that deals with uh, artists who use code as their kind of native format for expression. So
Okay.
it deals with a bunch of different communities that are oftentimes centered around different frameworks and how they choose to express themselves.
So it's very
Um,
interesting to people who are watching this video and following.
it should be. It's an extraordinary project.
Yeah,
It's
yeah.
so great. And uh, it's like it's kind of an interactive or kind of a navigable interview series, basically, where
Okay.
you can effectively infinitely traverse this series of conversations. Um, and then the second one is a project called 0 Days VR. This is a documentary project that we won an Emmy for, actually, and it deals with the topic of cyber warfare. And it was a kind of a collaboration with Participant Media, which is a documentary filmmaking kind of outfit, and Alex Gibney, who's a documentary filmmaker. And Alex described it really well. Like, he was saying that as he set out to make a documentary film, and he made a film, and we kind of made an adaptation or a parallel project in 0 Days VR. He found that essentially everything that mattered for that project was unfilmable. It all takes place in networks, and
Yeah.
it's about the relationship between Israel and the United States and Iran, and that whole kind of landscape of cyber warfare. And so over there, we were able to kind of put you as a viewer in the perspective of the virus and kind of moving through this landscape. And then I'll discuss one more project here, and that is a project called Blackout. And this was a documentary project, a little bit in the vein of Clouds, but really dealing with kind of more kind of human experiences and stories. And it takes place in the New York City subway. And it's a series of documentary interviews, long form, really beautiful and intimate documentary interviews. And in VR, you're enabled to walk through the space of a train car, and you're sort of here into the sort of internal mindset and stories and background and kind of driving questions for each of those people. And so there, it was created kind of in the shadow of the 2016 election, where we're experiencing echoes of this right now. But it was all about trying to look at the landscape of ideology and opinion, and try to look at the kind of more simple layer of just what are people's human drivers, and are we truly listening to each other in America right now? Unfortunately, I think it remains a theme. And so I'll just rounding it out. The last project is a project called The Changing Same, and this is a collaboration with the Co-Creation Lab at MIT and a group called the Rada Film Group. And this, my partner Yasmin is really spearheading for us, and it's a project that's a kind of almost like a surreal or sort of like a magical, realistic exploration of basically the last 400 years of basically racial terror and racism in America, and looking at it through a kind of almost like a surreal or a speculative lens. Um, and so that is a project that is ongoing right now.
Yeah, so it seems like you cover a range of topics, and I think it's interesting. You said in 0 Days VR, you're talking about using the technology to show things that can't be filmed. And
Yeah.
in other cases, it's more about trying to emphasize this variety of perspectives you are delving into. You mentioned another work, you're like Truth and Consequences, which is a
Yeah.
newer project.
Yeah.
Um,
So this is, oh, sorry, go ahead. I
no,
interrupted
no,
you.
yeah, I'd love to hear about it.
So this is a project that is a kind of personal project in a collaboration with my partner, kind of creative partner and life partner, Hannah Jayanti. And um, it's different than these in the sense that all of these are virtual reality experiences. Like you experience them as in a primary form by putting on a headset and moving through it. And there are all these amazing kind of affordances that you get from that. With Through the Consequences, it's a project that is a film project, and it takes, it's a documentary film project, and it's what we're calling a speculative documentary, and it's set in a town called Truth or Consequences, which is in southwestern New Mexico, and it's the nearest town to the world's first commercial spaceport, um, which is called Spaceport America. And it's this story that sort of takes place in the space of the town, and deals with the kind of world experience of these people. But the kind of theme of the film is that it's set in, basically lightly set in a near future. And so it has this sort of speculative premise. And for us, we used virtual reality to actually record um, scenes that are basically animations that played through the film. So what happened is we used the documentary footage from the film itself and reconstructed those worlds using a technique called photogrammetry, which it's sort of like, I was initially trained in photogrammetry in the context of archaeology. It's oftentimes used for archaeological preservation.
Yeah.
So we processed the footage and used it to sort of reconstruct these scenes, and then kind of virtually filmed inside those scenes using VR. So in a funny way, it's like the inverse. It's like the opposite of those other projects, where those projects that I described before, they very much like we created them in two-dimensional tools and creative tools, and then the viewer experiences them in 3D and immersively. Whereas with this project, it was kind of the inverse, where oops, sorry, let me show you another one of these segments. So where we did all of the creation in virtual reality, kind of virtually moving and virtually filming, all of it for a feature-length documentary film.
Okay.
Yeah.
Um, and so it's set in the near future, but it's sort of about the history of this town.
Yeah, it's an unusual project in the sense that when we started on the project, we made, there's sort of these themes that are just very palpable in the town, right? It's one of the poorer counties in New Mexico, which is one of the poorer states in the country. And there's this incredibly futuristic, kind of almost like temple of the future in the form of the spaceport, and there are these sort of tensions, and it's all built with tax money. But what we found was, when we started to tell that story, it was very, the nature of that plot sort of almost like looks down at the people in this town. Whereas when we actually went there, we found that people are building these incredibly beautiful lives. And so in the spirit of like truly listening to the way that they saw their world and their kind of worldview and their outlook, we created this sort of premise that allows them to basically be the tellers of the story. It ends up being a kind of more surreal or sort of magical telling, where it's set in a moment when basically the dreams of the space travel industry have come to fruition. And it discusses basically all of the complexities of that moment. It's sort of saying, in our ambition to build and to progress and to launch ourselves off the planet, what are we missing in the here and now? Like, as we look forward, why aren't we looking around? So that's sort of the theme of the project.
Do you feel like VR is especially conducive to telling these stories and sharing memories? Are there things that it does that you think that 2D documentary filmmaking can't?
Yes, I really, it's so interesting. I'm gonna, on the screen, I'll put basically this video of the kind of process of creating this, so you can kind of look at it. So there are, again, like I'm not a sort of a accelerationist in terms of saying VR is better than every other medium. I happen to think that we've yet to really surpass like the novel as far as immersion. However, there are these wonderful themes that I think virtual reality is well suited to. There are things it does really well. So one of them, and it's very simple, but it gives you an experience of scale and an experience of being situated inside of a space or a landscape, um, such that when you remember that experience, you have a memory that's a little bit more like the memory of being somewhere. And that was very much what the intention with this project was, to give that kind of experience to viewers. Oops, sorry, let me getting carried away with my slides. Um, so that is unique. And it's oddly simple, but it's just like a grounded sense of scale and presence. And that is incredibly special, I think. And what there are in the early stages of this as a medium, one of the things you find is like it's almost like people do the tropes first. You know, you do the sort of simple things first because people the creative discipline is emerging on one hand, and then you have the kind of sophistication of audiences emerging on the other hand, and they really have to meet in the middle. And so oftentimes you kind of get the I think you get it's not like you often will create things that might look campy in the future because they're just like the first cut at things, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's a lot of that in VR, and I happen to love it. Like there are themes of ephemerality, like ghostliness, sort of disembodied experiences, oftentimes also super kind of limited or embodied experiences was an early theme. So like being like an astronaut or being in a submarine, things that were like celebrating the constraint of VR, like accepting the fact that you're in a kind of odd bubble and making experiences that sort of relate to that. Um, Also, the thing that I love the most actually is that it, it can do this thing which I think few mediums are really good at, which is um, a kind of like space and time travel and thematic travel in a way that's really lovely, where you can go from theme to theme to theme. And somehow, as a person, you have an experience of it as this kind of evolving vision, and suddenly it all sort of makes sense. And you can kind of do this in film, but we have a lot of constraints that prevent you oftentimes from really exploring. And so there's something really special about VR where since you're there as a viewer, you kind of just accept that the story is getting created around you. Um, let's see, what other, oh, there's another really unique thing that's particular to DepthKit, which is the tool that we created or have created for um, capturing human beings, and I'll maybe talk about that in a moment,
Mhm.
um, which is that you can relate the theme of the piece, or you can kind of transmit the theme or the ideas of the piece through the actual materiality, the way you choose to represent the world. So in the case of these images I'm showing you here, all the themes are about a kind of incomplete memory or a sort of like fragmented recall or recollection of a space. And we're able to use what basically photographic material and represent it in these ways that are kind of ephemeral. So there's a relationship between form and content there that's quite unique.
Yeah.
And obviously you can do that, you know, you can do animation and that kind of thing, but it's quite special to be able to kind of be able to operate on both layers and communicate on both layers.
So you mentioned depth kit, and I think one of the really
Hmm?
interesting things about Scatter is that you're telling stories, but you're also making the tools that you use to tell these stories. And depth kit is volumetric filmmaking software that you sort of distribute and sell as a product, so that
Yeah.
other artists can use this as well. And I'm curious. I think this is always sort of a question of artists who make tools as part of their practice. I mean, do you see other people using these tools in ways that surprise you or that you find particularly interesting?
Oh my God, yes, yes, absolutely. I might start by just describing what it actually is.
Okay, sure.
Uh, so it is how do I say this? So as you step into wanting to create in this world, there are different challenges that you need to address. One of them is how am I actually going to capture the static elements of my scene, the background, the environment? Um, and there are lots of tools out there, and it's actually a pretty well explored space, like how to represent static and capture a static object. And some of those techniques I showed you related to truth or consequences are oftentimes how you do that. However, there's a very unique challenge, which is how to represent human beings in a way that is not eerie and not uncanny and not cartoonish, but in a kind of photographic vernacular. Um, and it's genuinely hard to do that, and it's hard to do that well. And so for us, as we set out to create in this way, we found that it was basically impossible to show people effectively. Um, And so we had to create our own tools. And so DepthKit is kind of a solution to that. And so this is kind of just giving you a sense of what an actual set looks like. And you can see on the right there, there's an Azure Connect, which is it's a Microsoft product, which is a depth sensor. But also, as I mentioned, these kinds of sensors are in iPhones and other devices. And it's attached to a conventional cinematic camera. And then you are able to use that, and you can use one sensor or you can use multiple sensors, and you use that to capture kind of three-dimensional representation of the world. And so then when you sort of play it back, you have this dimensional form instead of a static video. So that's what DepthKit is. So in answer to your question, though, it is such a wonderful and strange process to create tools, because it's very interesting. So we come from a background, we're very much hybrids. Like we have a team of people who have both computer science and engineering backgrounds, and also like arts degrees and backgrounds in fine art. And so essentially everyone on the team is some hybrid like that. And when you transition from creating your own work, where it's about working with small teams or yourself and kind of creating projects that are ultimately about individualistic expression, or it's oftentimes about translating your view of the world, there's something really strange and interesting about creating tools where it's almost like you accelerate that process, or you expand that process to a massive degree. However, it's no longer your worldview, or it's no longer your take on things. And there's just an extraordinary kind of sort of it's an interesting experience where you feel something similar to the experience of having created something and being satisfied that it exists, but just much fainter and then multiplied by thousands. And so we're sort of in that space now where people are creating things that are pieces, experiences, worldviews that are so far from mine, and because of that are so important to see and have emerge. And I'll give you one anecdote from the very early days of this project. I think the moment when we first really felt that this was going to go to strange places that we could never predict was in the early days of our tool, and we had released a prototype of it online. And basically in the course of a week or 2 weeks, 3 pieces emerged all at the same time. And one of them was basically softcore porn. Like it was a very beautiful and kind of sweet animation from Mexico City, and very kind of raunchy and intense. Not something that we were creating at the time. And then there was also what was kind of like a devotional piece. It was sort of a religious piece that in a way was celebrating people's relationship with divinity in kind of a Christian context. Very beautiful, very ephemeral. And again, it was like, one was kind of defining the intimate space. This was defining the kind of religious space. And then the third piece, completely, and the third piece was basically an advertisement for a weapons manufacturer. And it was somewhere between that and like almost like one of these future envisioning videos, which again, not something we would ever create. And so all of those things just came out at once, and we just had this moment of realizing, okay, like this is way bigger than us at this point.
Yeah, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
All right, well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today.
Thank you, Brian. I really enjoyed this.